Hello and welcome to another TLDR EU video. The CDU might have been Germany's leading party for over a decade, but recent polling suggests that this might be about to change. That's because in Germany, the Green Party has seen a significant boost in polling figures, with them currently on track to actually win the German federal election in September, potentially making them one of the world's only successful Green parties thus far. The thing is that the party is quite interesting, and actually their name might be a little misleading. So in this video, we're going to examine how green are the German Greens. Before we start, if you want to support the channel, consider subscribing or backing us on Patreon. In return for your Patreon support, you can get a whole bunch of perks, from early access to videos and the ability to vote on video topics, to exclusive TLDR live streams, behind the scenes posts, and your name in videos. Find out more about what you can get by clicking the link in the description. So, as we mentioned in the intro, the German Greens, who we'll be referring to as just the Greens from now on, are leading the polls for the German federal election, which is set to take place on September 26th. This has got many people very excited, because with the exception of the very brief Latvian Green Premiership in 2004, it would be the world's first ever Green Premier. This is particularly startling for those of us who live in the UK, because even though we got on well with the charming Jonathan Bartley, who we met not long ago, a Green Party Prime Minister still seems quite a way off in Britain. So let's examine their policies and what other Green parties might learn from them. We're going to split this video into three parts: economic policy, social policy, and foreign policy. So let's start with economic policy. The Greens have an interesting economic policy, which combines classic left-wing economics with neoliberal environmental policies. Let's start with the classic left-wing policies. The Greens want to raise minimum wage from €9.50 to €12, enforce hefty taxes on online tech giants, and increase income tax on the highest earners in order to pay for the costs of the pandemic. Their market-based environmental policies include an increase in air travel taxes, an increase in carbon taxes, and EU tariffs on climate-unfriendly imports to discourage other countries from producing them. Annalena Baerbock, the Green Chancellor candidate, even suggested a state-backed venture capital fund to support green startups. Essentially, the Green Party have more faith in the private sector when it comes to solving the climate crisis than other green or left-wing parties around the world, who sometimes dismiss market-based solutions as capitalist platitudes. That's not to say that they don't have some classic environmental policies though. For example, they want to immediately shut down Germany's 20 dirtiest coal plants, with 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Interestingly, the Greens also want to shut down all of Germany's nuclear power plants and prefer high-efficiency coal to nuclear for transitioning to 100% renewable. The Greens also want to completely phase out the production of petrol and diesel cars and spend big on high-speed rail instead, all as part of a €500 billion 10-year green investment plan. So that's their economic policy. Environmental, as you'd expect, but also market-based. What about their social policy? Well, when it comes to what we might call cultural issues, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and racism, the Greens are firmly on the left. They're impressively feminist. Their Chancellor candidate, Annalena Baerbock, is the only woman in the race, and they've always had two leaders, one male and one female. And since 1979, at least 50% of their elected posts have to go to women. Policy-wise, they support gender quotas on executive boards and doing more to address the gender pay gap. On LGBTQ+ rights, the Greens want to amend Germany's constitution to prohibit discrimination on the grounds of sexual identity and legally recognise gender ambiguity. On the racism front, the Greens' Diversity Working Group recently published a 10-point plan against racism, which included police reform, an anti-racist commissioner, and anti-racism education. When it comes to immigration, the Greens' policy is actually pretty nuanced though. They have basically a humanitarian immigration policy. They support the loosening of asylum laws, and no other party fields more candidates from immigrant backgrounds than the Greens. They're also focused on integration and preventing international migrant crises. Firstly, on integration, their 2017 manifesto states that to live here happily means accepting our constitution and its fundamental values, and they justify their policy of accepting whole families as migrants on the grounds that it will help them integrate. And this is interesting because, at least from a UK perspective, talk of immigrant integration is often associated with the right wing of politics.
You get a lot of people to come who didn't speak English. Do you think that would aid and abet integration in society? Well, the answer, of course, to that clearly is no.
Secondly, on limiting migration crises, in that same 2017 manifesto, the Greens argued that Germany should limit migration crises and therefore immigration by stopping arms exports and climate change. This is clever, humane politics. It's clever because if you're wary of high levels of immigration, as half of Germans are, then the Greens can say that the best way of limiting immigration is to stop arms exports and mitigating climate-induced migration. But if you're on the other side, if you're pro-immigration, then the Greens can say that they've got the most immigrant-friendly policy out there. It's humane politics because, well, limiting migration crises while loosening your asylum rules is plausibly the morally optimal policy. Finally, let's talk about foreign policy. Historically, the Greens have been pacifists, and while this has changed a bit in recent years, it hasn't changed all that much. Baerbock supports complete denuclearization, withdrawing Germany from NATO's nuclear sharing programs and banning all US nuclear weapons from German soil. Habeck, her co-leader, called the NATO 2% spending target symbolic, and in a statement to the Bundestag in April 2019, the party said that the 2% target does not make sense and is even dangerous. There's some internal disagreement within the Green Party about whether they could support military action. Some of the party think that the only time that military action could be justified is if there was NATO approval, but others argue that with both Russia and China holding vetoes over NATO action, there could be cases where military intervention was justified but not approved by NATO. This leads us on to the last interesting aspect of the Greens' foreign policy, that they're very tough on China and Russia. While Merkel was keen on maintaining economic ties with China, and so has been relatively restrained with any criticism, Green MPs have called on their government to condemn human rights violations in Xinjiang, oppose suppression of free speech, and speak out against Chinese disinformation. In response, Beijing refused to give one Green MP a visa for a parliamentary committee visit to the country. On Russia, the Greens oppose Nord Stream 2, in part because it would keep Germany reliant on fossil fuels, and they've also advocated for sanctions in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea. And the Greens party spokesman for Eastern Europe went as far as accusing Merkel of cuddling up to Putin's regime. So that's the German Green Party. Eco-friendly but with a free market spin. Firmly on the left when it comes to social issues, but with a more nuanced take on immigration. And a generally dovish foreign policy with a strong emphasis on human rights. I'd be interested to see what you think of these policies. Would they be successful in your country? And should your country's Green or environmental party take on some or all of these ideas? Let us know what you think Greens around the world should learn from the Germans in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.